Usually when we talk about getting a medical diagnosis, there is this immense comfort in the precision of it all.
Oh, absolutely. It's so clean.
Right. It's like engineering. Like you fall, your arm hurts, you go to the hospital, and the x-ray shows that jagged little white line.
Yeah, and the doctor just points at the screen and says, there it is. There's the break.
Exactly. It's binary, broken or not broken. But then you step into the world of inner healing.
Oh, boy.
You
Yeah.
step into spiritual development or, trying to unpack religious trauma. And suddenly it's like someone has taken a sledgehammer to that x-ray machine.
That's the perfect way to put it. I mean, we are looking at a diagnostic landscape that is honestly a total labyrinth.
It really is. And which brings us to why we are sitting here today. I want you, the person listening to this right now, to picture a scenario.
Okay.
Maybe you're a spiritual gay man. You've spent years doing the incredibly heavy lifting of untangling yourself from a traditional conservative religious upbringing.
Which is a massive undertaking.
Right. And you survived that. And now you are on a search for authentic healing. So you find yourself sitting in a perfectly curated wellness space.
The aesthetic is immaculate, of course.
Always. The lighting is soft. There is Palo Santo burning in the corner. Everyone is sitting on ethically sourced meditation cushions, wearing earth tones.
And using words like alignment and vibration and quantum healing.
Exactly. It looks like the safest place on earth. But as the retreat leader is speaking, you feel this sudden, inexplicable tight knot in the pit of your stomach.
Yeah, that gut feeling.
Right. And you look around and everyone else seems perfectly at peace. So you think, it must be me. I'm just unhealed.
But what if that knot in your stomach isn't a sign that you are unhealed?
Mm-hmm.
What if that knot is actually your most finely tuned spiritual instinct screaming at you to run?
That is exactly what we are pulling apart today. We have been poring over 3 incredibly potent roadmaps for this.
Really heavy hitters, yeah.
We have an analysis called The Anatomy of Pseudospirituality and Spiritual Narcissism. We also have a philosophical essay titled The Logos of Truth versus the Architecture of Bias.
And that really moving piece on recovery called The Sacred Betrayal, from spiritual control to communal healing.
Right. And what these texts do is map out the invisible architecture of spiritual exploitation. Our mission today is to unpack the profound difference between real spiritual growth and manipulative pseudo-spirituality.
And we're going to provide a concrete, step-by-step checklist for spotting spiritual narcissism.
Yes, and finally explore how you can find safe communal healing after experiencing this kind of exploitation.
Because that search for authentic meaning, it's a beautiful, deeply human drive, deserves to be honored.
Absolutely.
But we also have to completely validate that skepticism you feel in those incense-filled rooms.
So let's start right at the beginning of the journey that so many queer folks take. The texts paint a picture of a pipeline from religious trauma straight into wellness exploitation.
And it is honestly devastating to read, because it is just so common. It is a systemic loop.
Right. Break that down for us, because the text points out a very specific dynamic here.
Well, think about the sheer willpower it takes for an LGBTQ person to leave a rigid, homophobic religious system. You step out of those church doors for the last time, and you breathe this massive sigh of relief.
You think, I did it, I escaped the judgment.
Exactly. But too often, because of how the modern wellness industry is structured, you are just stepping from the frying pan directly into the fire.
But the fire doesn't look like fire. That is the insidious part. We swapped the angry youth pastor for, a guy named River with a $500 crystal singing bowl.
Right. It looks incredibly soft. The text talks about how a person might leave a church that flat out calls them sinful or abominable.
Which are overtly aggressive words.
Very aggressive. But then they enter a spiritual community or a wellness collective that uses a completely different dictionary. Suddenly, you aren't sinful. You are out of polarity.
Or you are energetically imbalanced.
Or my personal favorite, you are karmically confused.
Oh man, karmically confused. The language changes to sound softer, more therapy adjacent, more inclusive.
Yeah, but the underlying architecture of the wound repeats exactly as it did in the church.
The new space might not provoke the public disgust or have the harsh, condemning aesthetics of old-school religion. They might even have a pride flag in the window.
But underneath that aesthetic cover, your queer existence, your specific human embodiment, is still fundamentally being interpreted as a spiritual disorder.
It's like downloading a new operating system for your computer. It has this incredibly sleek, beautiful interface. The graphics are amazing.
The fonts are modern, it runs smoothly.
Right, but it is still running the exact same virus in the background. It is still slowly corrupting the hard drive, just with better graphics.
That is a perfect analogy. And it begs the question, why does this work so well? Why are LGBTQ people so uniquely vulnerable to being exploited by people offering healing?
Yeah, what does the psychology in the text say about that?
If we unpack it, it really comes down to a deep, pre-existing vulnerability that these systems actively prey upon. Many queer people have been trained by their families, the culture, traditional religion, to see themselves as inherently spiritually defective.
Wow. Yeah, that is a heavy, heavy burden to carry.
It shapes your entire worldview. So when you leave those traditional spaces, you don't just leave the theology behind, you carry the wound with you.
You carry this massive, unmet hunger for meaning, for belonging, and most importantly, for moral repair.
You want someone to look at you and tell you that you are fundamentally good. You want to know that you actually belong in the universe.
Exactly, and that hunger is beautiful. But pseudo-spirituality zeroes in on that open wound like a heat-seeking missile.
It really does. It offers a cure for the defectiveness, but only if you buy into a new system of hierarchy.
Right, it takes that deeply human need for acceptance, and it quietly twists it into a need for alignment. And alignment is always defined by whatever the new guru's rules are.
So if you've ever felt uneasy in one of these spaces, you really aren't crazy.
Not at all. The popularity of a movement or the fact that a celebrity goes to that retreat center or their inclusive branding, none of that is proof of its safety.
You have to look past the soft language and look at the actual mechanics of how the space operates.
Which brings us to the hardest part, defining our terms. Because if we want to protect ourselves, we have to know what we are actually looking at.
We have to understand what real spirituality is and what it most definitely is not.
And the sources make a really vital distinction here. They don't just call the bad stuff bad spirituality. They use the term pseudo-spirituality, a counterfeit.
And that word counterfeit is doing a tremendous amount of heavy lifting in this text.
Tell me more about that.
Well, think about how a counterfeit $100 bill works. A counterfeit only has power because it perfectly mimics the aesthetic of the real thing, while possessing absolutely zero of the actual value.
Right. Pseudo-spirituality borrows the tone, the aesthetic, and the vocabulary of genuine spiritual growth, but it completely revises the function.
Let's look at the contrast the text lays out, because they are incredibly sharp. Real spirituality clarifies truth. Pseudo-spirituality mystifies things to confuse you.
Real spirituality deepens your sense of personal responsibility. Pseudo-spirituality gives you permission to avoid responsibility while feeling profound about it.
Yes. And this next one is the linchpin. Real spirituality exposes the ego. Pseudo-spirituality gives the ego a sacred vocabulary.
It's a sacred vocabulary. I mean, think about how often we hear these words casually thrown around in wellness circles. Karma, vibration, awakening.
Divine masculine, divine feminine, shadow work.
Yes. The text calls this process extraction or colonization. What is actually happening psychologically when a wellness influencer uses these words?
The author argues that pseudo-spiritual systems essentially colonize older traditions. They take incredibly powerful ancient words like karma or shadow, and they strip them entirely out of their original ethical, cultural, or philosophical context.
They empty the word of its historic discipline.
Exactly. And then they refill that hollowed-out shell with modern bias, modern self-help tropes, or pure marketing strategy.
They hollow out the word and pour their own agenda into it. The examples the text gives are staggering. It points out how karma becomes an excuse not to help people.
Right. Like you see someone struggling with poverty, and instead of feeling a moral obligation to help, the pseudo-spiritual person says, oh, I shouldn't intervene. That's just their karma. They chose this life to learn a lesson.
It is moral evasion masquerading as deep spiritual wisdom.
It really is. And detachment becomes emotional avoidance. Vibration turns into a rigid, passive-aggressive class system.
Oh, the vibration thing. You hear people say, I had to cut them out of my life. Their vibration was just too low for me.
It's just a spiritualized caste system to avoid dealing with complex human relationships.
And divine masculine and feminine just become recycled 1950s gender hierarchies dressed up in astrology.
Which is incredibly alienating for queer people.
And shadow work. This one makes me so incredibly angry. The text explains how shadow work becomes a tool to blame the wounded person for being wounded.
Right. If you are upset that someone crossed your boundary, they tell you, You are just projecting your shadow.
It is entirely weaponized language. And the reason it is so effective is because the language sounds ancient and mystical. People are intimidated into accepting it.
Because if a charismatic teacher tells you that your totally valid anger is actually a karmic block, you think, well, who am I to question karma?
Okay, I have to push back a little here, though.
Go for it.
I hear what you're saying about weaponizing language, but isn't spirituality inherently about the mysterious? Isn't it about the unseen and the unexplainable?
That's a very common view, yeah.
So if we start demanding that every single spiritual concept be perfectly logical and empirical, aren't we just doing science? Where is the magic?
That is a phenomenal question, and it is exactly what the essay, The Logos of Truth versus the Architecture of Bias, addresses head-on.
Oh, okay. Let's dig into that.
Yeah. The author argues that our modern culture has developed a terribly sloppy definition of spirituality. We tend to treat anything mysterious, non-empirical, or supernatural sounding as spirituality.
Right. If it involves crystals or unseen energy, we call it spiritual.
Exactly. And the text argues that is a massive mistake.
Okay, so if it's not just spooky, mysterious stuff, how do they define it? Let's break this down like I'm 5.
The author defines real spirituality through the concept of the logos. Now, logos is an old philosophical term, but the way the text uses it is very practical. Real spirituality is defined as the disciplined search for invariant truth in lived experience.
Invariant truth, meaning truth that doesn't change based on who is looking at it.
Exactly. It's about the underlying architecture of reality. Science and spirituality actually have different objects of study, but they should both be incredibly rigorous.
Okay, so how do they differ?
Science asks what can be measured and tested externally: gravity, cellular biology, physics.
Yeah.
Spirituality asks what truths reveal themselves internally through consciousness, moral recognition, suffering, compassion, and responsibility.
Okay, so just because I can't put compassion in a test tube doesn't mean it isn't real. It just requires a different kind of rigorous observation.
Precisely. The non-empirical nature of spirituality does not make it irrational. It means it is studying things like the human conscience and the transformation of perception.
That makes a lot of sense.
If you are practicing real spirituality, the logos, it should make you more truthful, more compassionate, and more capable of seeing reality without bias.
And counterfeit spirituality.
Counterfeit spirituality, on the other hand, uses the mysterious unseen to protect bias.
To protect bias. That is such a key phrase. And I want to pause here for a moment for a bit of impartial reporting based on the text.
Right, because the text gets into some very specific historical and political examples.
Exactly. The author uses a couple of very specific examples to illustrate how this architecture of bias works systemically and politically. They point to the esoteric philosopher Rudolf Steiner, and they point to modern radical Christian nationalism.
Yes, and we need to be clear to everyone listening. We are objectively reporting the author's analysis here. We aren't taking political sides.
Right. We're just looking at the mechanical function of these ideologies as laid out in the source material.
So the author uses them as case studies to show how spiritual vocabulary is used to build human hierarchy. With Rudolf Steiner, the text examines his use of terms like karma, spiritual evolution, and root races.
Which sound very mystical on the surface.
They do. But Steiner used these mystical concepts to construct an elaborate occult hierarchy that literally ranked human cultures, races, and bodies in terms of spiritual purity.
And with radical Christian nationalism, the text notes the use of Christian symbols not as tools for inward spiritual awakening or compassion, but as mechanisms to sacralize the nation.
It's exactly. Mechanisms to enforce strict gender hierarchies, promote anti-LGBT bias, and demand political domination.
Right. The author's point is mechanical. Just because Steiner used the word spiritual, or a political movement uses the word Christian, doesn't mean they are aligned with the logos, that invariant truth of compassion.
They are using the vocabulary of the divine to make human prejudice feel holy, to make human inequality seem like a cosmic law.
They are essentially laundering their bigotry through the divine, which is why pseudo-spirituality is so dangerous.
Really is.
It takes the emotional climate of a person, their fears, their resentments, their discomfort with queer people, their hunger for meaning, and it affirms all of that in sacred language.
It tells people that their prejudice isn't prejudice. It's spiritual discernment. It's the divine order.
And if your prejudice is divine, you never have to apologize for it.
Exactly. Which brings us to the most practical, boots-on-the-ground part of this deep dive.
Yes, the checklist. If pseudo-spirituality uses the exact same vocabulary as real spirituality, how on earth do you spot it?
Right, because it's camouflage.
If I am a gay man walking into a new wellness collective on a Tuesday night, how do I know if I'm walking into a place of healing or a place that is going to subtly tell me I am spiritually defective? What is the invisible architecture I should be looking for?
The text provides a brilliant framework for this. It argues that you shouldn't just look at the beliefs of the group. You need to look at the personality structure of the system.
The personality structure.
Yes, because pseudo-spirituality functions with a highly recognizable psychological dynamic, spiritual narcissism.
And we aren't talking about narcissism as a casual insult, right? Like, oh, the yoga instructor takes too many mirror selfies.
No, not vanity. We are talking about narcissism as a structural dynamic of power, defense, and control.
Right.
The text outlines a meticulous 10-point checklist for spotting this. And I want us to really take our time here. We need to unpack these deeply so the listener can use this as a mental checklist.
Let's do it. Let's imagine joining one of these groups and walk through exactly how this plays out. Point number 1 on the checklist is grandiosity. How does that manifest in a spiritual space?
It usually starts with the leader, or the core doctrine of the system, claiming access to a higher truth, a hidden cosmic law, or an ancient knowledge that is completely beyond the reach of ordinary people.
So it's not a teacher saying, hey, I found this meditation practice helpful, maybe you will too.
Exactly. It is a teacher saying, I have downloaded the definitive blueprint of the universe from the 5th dimension.
It's an absolute claim to authority. It elevates them immediately above questioning.
Yes, which leads directly into the second point, specialness. Because grandiosity on its own is alienating, the guru needs followers.
So they have to make the followers feel included in that grandiosity.
Right. So the system creates a dynamic of specialness. The guru, and by extension the inner circle of the movement, becomes uniquely chosen. They are the awakened ones. They are the initiated.
That is the hook, isn't it? They don't just say they are special. They look at you and say, you have the potential to be special too. You aren't like the asleep masses out there.
It strokes your ego perfectly.
Yeah.
It creates an immediate in-group and out-group. Everyone outside the retreat center is in the dark, but inside this room, you have the light.
Okay, so you are feeling special, you are in the group. Then we hit point 3, validation of bias.
We touched on this earlier, but it is so important.
Yeah, how does this actually work psychologically, especially for a queer person in these spaces? Let's say I'm a retreat leader and I have a subconscious, internalized homophobia.
Yeah.
I'm uncomfortable with a gay couple attending my couples intimacy workshop. I know I can't just say I don't like gay people because that would ruin my enlightened brand.
Right. So the system takes that ordinary prejudice and rebrands it.
Mm-hmm.
You, as a retreat leader, might pull the couple aside and say, your energy is disrupting the divine polarity of the space.
Oh, wow.
The work we're doing requires the sacred friction of the biological masculine and feminine.
So I didn't say I was uncomfortable. I weaponized the architecture of the universe to cover my own bias.
Exactly.
I turned ordinary human discomfort into a doctrine of cosmic purity.
And for the queer person receiving that, it is devastating because it sounds like a spiritual truth, not a personal attack.
Which naturally leads to point 4, immunity from correction. Let's say that gay couple pushes back. Let's say they point out the hypocrisy. What happens?
This is a classic narcissistic defense mechanism. When the teacher or the system is criticized, the criticism is never, ever engaged with honestly.
It's deflected.
More than deflected.
Yeah.
It is immediately dismissed as a flaw in the critic. If you question the guru, you are told you are in your ego.
Or you are in lower consciousness.
Right. You're spiritually blind, or you just haven't done enough shadow work to understand the teaching.
I'm not wrong. You're just not evolved enough to comprehend why I'm right. It is a perfect closed loop. It is maddening.
And once you doubt yourself, point 5 takes hold, dependency.
But hold on. Don't all teachers want you to keep learning from them? Where's the line between being a dedicated student and being dependent?
A healthy teacher wants you to eventually graduate. They want to give you the tools to trust your own mind. Pseudo-spirituality teaches followers that they absolutely need the system to survive.
So you can't ever graduate.
Never. You need the guru's specific blessing. You need to keep buying the advanced retreat tickets. You need their specific breathwork method to stay spiritually safe.
Real spirituality fosters independence. Pseudo-spirituality creates a permanent patient.
You are always just one course away from being truly healed.
Okay, point 6 on the text's checklist is moral reversal. And honestly, reading the text, this one chills me.
It is the darkest mechanic on the list.
How does someone get convinced that cruelty is actually a good thing? That seems like a massive psychological leap.
It happens through grooming. This is where cruelty becomes rebranded as truth. A leader might publicly humiliate a student, breaking them down in front of a group.
Which sounds horrible.
But then they reframe it as, I am destroying your ego for your own good. This is tough love from the universe. Or abandoning someone who's going through a mental health crisis is reframed as maintaining spiritual detachment.
Or enforcing strict, abusive hierarchy is called maintaining divine order. It completely flips your moral compass upside down.
Yes. You start believing that your empathy is a weakness and their cruelty is enlightenment.
And to keep the group cohesive while this abuse is happening, the system relies on point 0.7 projection.
Right. The system projects all of its own flaws and toxicity outward onto the rest of the world.
Outsiders, or people who leave the group, are labeled as asleep, corrupt, impure, materialistic, or low vibration.
It's an isolation tactic. If everyone outside the group is low vibration, you can never leave because there is nowhere safe to go.
Exactly. It creates a terrifyingly effective us versus them mentality. And inside that bubble, we see point 0.8 hierarchy as identity.
The obsession with ranking. The narcissist views all relationships through a lens of power and status.
So in a pseudo-spiritual group, people are constantly sorted. Are you awakened or asleep? Are you pure or impure?
Are you a 3D thinker or a 5D thinker? It completely replaces the concept of inherent human equality with a spiritual caste system.
So why do smart, rational people stay in environments like this? That brings us to point 9, charm and aesthetic cover.
This is the trap. The system looks beautiful. A narcissist often presents as incredibly charming.
Do you know how to draw you in?
Exactly. The system uses sacred language, ancient symbols, soft lighting, incredible wellness branding, and charismatic presence. It uses beauty and the feeling of peace to completely bypass your critical thinking.
It's the halo effect. If the retreat center has a gorgeous organic garden and the leader speaks in a soothing whisper, our brains instinctively think, this must be good.
And then finally, the trap snaps shut with point 10, control through meaning.
This one is deep.
It is the ultimate usurpation of your humanity. The system doesn't just tell you how to behave, it dictates what your internal life means.
It tells you what your suffering means.
Yes. It tells you what your doubts mean, and it tells you what your identity actually is. It strips you of the right to interpret your own life.
Looking at all 10 of those points, it's exactly like dating a toxic romantic partner who constantly gaslights you.
That is exactly what it is.
But instead of saying you're crazy, they say, you just aren't spiritually evolved enough to understand my actions. They literally use the universe as their alibi for being manipulative.
That is the perfect analogy. And because they use the universe as an alibi, it brings us to the ultimate red flag, the definitive warning sign the author points to.
What is that?
It's not just asking if the beliefs sound a little strange or esoteric. The single question you must ask is, does this system make itself impossible to question?
Let me repeat that for everyone listening, because this is the core of the entire deep dive. Does this system make itself impossible to question?
Because the moment a spiritual system builds an invisible architecture where it cannot be questioned, where your questions are treated as evidence of your spiritual failure, it stops functioning as spirituality.
It is functioning purely as a control mechanism.
It is protecting the guru's authority, not revealing truth.
Which explains why surviving this is so difficult. I mean, understanding these 10 mechanics logically, mapped out on a whiteboard, is one thing, but living through it, escaping it, why does falling for these systems and eventually leaving them hurt so incredibly deeply?
The source text, The Sacred Betrayal, answers this with a phrase that is honestly haunting. It calls spiritual exploitation a crime of the heart.
A crime of the heart. Why that specific phrasing?
Because it hurts so deeply. Precisely because it doesn't arrive looking like abuse. It arrives wearing the face of love, of trust, of healing, and of guidance.
Right. A spiritual manipulator doesn't walk up to you on the street and say, hi, I'd like to assert total power over your psychology, isolate you from your friends, and drain your bank account.
No, they don't hand you a glossy brochure for a cult. They target the most vulnerable, beautiful part of you. The part that wants meaning, that wants God, that wants to heal from your past.
And they look you in the eye and say, I see you. I see your infinite potential.
I know the pain you've been carrying your whole life, and I can guide you out of it. Just trust me.
And for a gay man who has maybe been told his whole life by his family or his old church or society that he is somehow fundamentally broken, having an authority figure look at him in a beautiful retreat center and say, I see your divine potential, I mean, of course you're going to open your heart to that.
You have been dying for water in a desert.
Exactly. You are parched. And the violator uses that exact opening, that natural, beautiful thirst for connection and repair, to insert their hierarchy, their control, and their shame.
That is why it's a crime of the heart. The text is very clear on this point to help alleviate the shame victims feel. You weren't tricked because you were stupid or gullible.
No. You were betrayed through the language of love. You were betrayed because you were open to healing.
I want to read the stark contrast from the source material here because they really drive home the psychological difference between real care and counterfeit care.
Please do. Let's hear them.
The author writes, "Real love helps without possession. Pseudo-love helps in order to own.
Wow.
Real guidance strengthens your perception. Pseudo-guidance makes you doubt it.
That one hits hard. Let's read the next ones. Real trust gives you room to question. Pseudo-trust demands surrender.
Real aid restores your agency. Pseudo-aid creates dependence."
Those contrasts just cut right to the bone. If you are listening to this right now and you have experienced this kind of dynamic, we want to validate you directly.
Absolutely.
If you walked away from a spiritual teacher or a wellness community or a coach feeling deeply confused, feeling like you couldn't trust your own mind anymore, feeling smaller and more anxious than when you first arrived, that was not a failure of your spirituality.
That was not you failing to do the work.
It was an emotional and relational violation committed against
It
you.
was pseudo-spirituality making you easier to manage. Real spirituality makes you more whole, more robust, more capable of standing on your own 2 feet.
And this realization that the harm was real, that the system was rigged, and that it wasn't your fault is the absolute pivot point toward actual lasting healing.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps most important question of this deep dive.
How do you recover from a wound that is so deep? A wound that is tied to your very sense of the divine and that leaves you feeling so incredibly isolated.
The isolation is the key word there. The text explains that spiritual exploitation's very first and most potent weapon is isolation.
It teaches you to distrust your own moral instincts.
It tells you that if you feel uncomfortable, it's just your shadow acting up. It isolates you inside your own mind, making you feel like you are the only one who is struggling.
So you think you're the only one failing. You look around the room at everyone else meditating perfectly and you think, I'm the broken one. I just don't get it.
Precisely. You are siloed in your shame. And that is exactly why the antidote to this specific kind of abuse has to be communal.
Healthy community is what restores your inner compass.
When people gather and actually compare notes, when they say, hey, did the guru say this weird thing to you too?
When they name the patterns clearly without shaming each other, something magical happens psychologically.
The private confusion you have been carrying suddenly becomes a shared, visible pattern of systemic manipulation.
It's like the curtain finally gets pulled back on the Wizard of Oz. You see the levers being pulled.
Exactly. The false authority of the guru is broken simply by people talking honestly to each other. You realize, wait a minute, I wasn't unhealed or low vibration. I was responding to real harm. My internal alarm bells were actually working perfectly the whole time.
But here is the massive hurdle for an LGBTQ person, or really anyone who has been through this cycle.
Right.
If you have already been burned by community in a traditional church setting, and then you sought refuge and got burned again by community in a wellness setting, how on earth do you know if a new community is actually healthy? Trusting a group of people again feels like willingly walking straight into a minefield.
It is a profound risk, and your hesitation is entirely justified. But the text gives us a roadmap for what healthy community actually looks like in practice, so you aren't flying blind.
What does that look like?
First and foremost, a healthy community does not simply replace one guru with another. It does not demand obedience to a new set of unquestionable rules or a new charismatic leader.
It doesn't just swap the stained glass for healing crystals and call it a day.
Right. And specifically for an LGBTQ person, a healthy community doesn't just tolerate you. It actively engages in reversing the systemic damage you've endured.
It affirms that your sexuality, your gender, who you love, and your physical embodiment are not spiritual failures.
They are not karmic blocks or obstacles to enlightenment. They are vital, beautiful, necessary parts of your human wholeness.
It rehumanizes you. It doesn't rank you on a spiritual ladder. It brings you back down to earth in the best possible way.
If exploitation isolates people to control them, community restores them through connection.
If bias ranks people to create power dynamics, community rehumanizes them to create equality.
And if pseudo-spirituality makes harm feel sacred, a healthy community helps people clearly name harm as harm again.
So as we bring all of this together, we want to leave you with the ultimate litmus test. The final questions you must ask of any spiritual system, any teacher, any wellness retreat, or any community you engage with moving forward.
This is your survival kit.
Ask yourself, does this system restore my dignity and my agency?
Does it help me trust my own mind more, or does it constantly make me doubt my own perception?
Does it make people more honest and compassionate in their messy daily lives? Or does it flatter their prejudice and make superiority feel like enlightenment?
Does it actively allow questioning, or does questioning immediately become proof that you are unhealed?
If the underlying structure of the space relies on shame, hierarchy, control, or spiritual ranking, it is not healing.
It doesn't matter how beautiful the music is or how ancient the vocabulary sounds, it is the exact same old wound wearing a new costume.
We have covered so much ground today. We started by recognizing that devastating pipeline from religious trauma straight into the soft hierarchy of modern wellness.
We looked at how pseudo-spiritual systems extract sacred vocabulary and hollow it out to fill it with modern bias.
We unpacked the logos, the invariant truth of compassion. We walked through the 10-point checklist for spotting spiritual narcissism from grandiosity all the way to controlling the very meaning of your suffering.
We acknowledged the deep crime of the heart that is spiritual betrayal.
And we explored how finding healthy, non-hierarchical community is the only way back to your own inner compass.
It is a journey from having your reality constantly dictated to you, back to claiming the architecture of your own truth.
And as we wrap up this conversation, there's one final provocative thought we want to leave you with. Something to mull over on your own time, which builds on everything the sources have told us.
Think about it this way. If pseudo-spirituality relies entirely on convincing you that you are fundamentally broken, if it relies on making you believe you desperately need a guru, a specific breathing method, or a higher vibration to decipher the universe, and if real spirituality is actually about honoring human dignity, invariant truth, and wholeness,
what if the most profoundly awakened, the most deeply spiritual act you can possibly perform right now isn't about ascending to some higher cosmic vibration at all?
what if it is simply choosing to trust your own instincts, your own moral compass, and your own beautiful embodied self all over again?
What if your skepticism of the guru is actually the voice of the divine inside you saying you are already whole?
You don't need a clean x-ray to prove you are healing.
You just have to trust the feeling of the bones knitting themselves back together. Keep that 10-point checklist close, trust that knot in your stomach, and keep pursuing that authentic, uncompromising healing. You've got this.